So my name's Chris Byrnes. I'm an IP lawyer. I have the privilege of getting to work with most of the BioDAOs here. I'm an IP advisor at Molecule and a part of an IP advisor for the BioXYZ cohorts of folks. Outside of my Web3 practice, I actually am pretty active as a lawyer in the psychedelic space, which is what makes DeSci.DAO so exciting to me. And really excited to talk today in particular about the vision that we have for DeSci.DAO. We're going to be launching the token this fall. Now that we've released the IP-NFT and IPT protocol through Molecule, there's a lot of design space here for all types of really cool forms of tokenized commoning and some means for doing open science that I'll explain and hopefully pique some interest with some new models and maybe some new sort of means for using tokenization and these tokenization protocols in an interesting way. So first, I'm going to walk quickly through the psychedelics market. For those who haven't been paying that much attention to the psychedelics market, it's a fascinating space. And as a market, it's very unique. And what that really means is there's a really interesting use case, I think, for decentralized science as we sort of integrate DeSci into all things biotech markets or pharma markets. I'll walk briefly through a little image of our DeSci.DAO vision, talk about our Lighthouse project, and then get into some of these tokenization schematics. One on an open science platform that we'll be launching, and then another on DeSci.DAO Commons, which is something I'm especially excited about. So psychedelics really promise to massively disrupt the market. When we talk about the market here, we're oftentimes largely talking about mental health treatment, which just costs the economy, trillions of dollars a year. Across the Europe and the US, we're seeing a sort of loosening of the regulatory frameworks that allow psychedelics to be going through what's considered to be a psychedelic renaissance, a new influx of funding and research really for the advent of psychedelic science and a better understanding of how psychedelics can really help to treat mental health problems that are either treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, things that are really kind of jamming up much of the economy. And so in 2022, we've seen $526 million of funding go into psychedelics. The estimated market size by 2026 for global treatment of mental health is around 240 billion. So obviously massive market potential if we can really get some breakthroughs here. Psychedelic Science was the largest conference this past year in Denver, over 10,000 attendees. That sort of was this huge hallmark in the psychedelic space for saying, okay, we've made it. This is getting serious. So while this is largely happening in the US, it's expanding through Europe as well. And much like we've seen with cannabis and kind of the path cannabis took, psychedelics seem to be sort of following this path of loosening up decriminalization on a state-by-state basis, seeing where we can finally get with federal law or sort of national level law in the EU. But I think it's going to be easier than cannabis as well, because there's just a lot more really important use cases that I think are a little easier for the public to kind of swallow from a public health perspective. Oftentimes psychedelic assisted therapy is not it's not something you're doing every day. These are more oftentimes kind of 1 to 3 or a short set of treatments that you do with a psychotherapist. So there's some really serious science here, along with a lot of really fun culture, of course. So on the IP side of things, which is where DeSci.Berlin really intends to kind of make its mark and make its splash, the psychedelic market is just full of controversy. I know this is a super noisy slide. It doesn't even catch all of the headlines that have been coming out from magazines, newspapers, journals, over the past year, over the past couple of years. There's a huge concern around the monopolization of psychedelics, and oftentimes the way in which IP is extracted from indigenous communities and people who've been stewarding this knowledge for decades, centuries, millennia in some instances. But if we just pick up from the academic research on psychedelics that was happening in the 50s and 60s, and which was criminalized in the early 70s, we see there also being a big concern over, well, how much IP is actually out there to grab. And while there is certainly some, and I, in my other sort of outside my Web3 practice as a patent lawyer, I'm oftentimes working closely with clients helping to draft some of those patents on occasion. But what we see with this is, typically when you apply for a patent, you get in front of a patent examiner, of course. They have, maybe 10 hours or so to look at an average application in the first instance. And they're looking largely through what is called patent prior art, right? All these other patents that have come through the office historically. And yes, their research will also scrape into, trying to dig up academic articles or other knowledge that's been published that's outside of patents, but they're a little less effective at doing so there. So in the psychedelic space, because of prohibition, we don't have 4 decades now of patent prior art, even though there has continued to be evolution of science, oftentimes in underground markets. And similarly, the whole framework for intellectual property, we've had some great talks already today talking about its European roots. It's very Eurocentric in how knowledge is imagined to be produced. The lone inventor in the garage, this type of thing. These are rooted in epistemological assumptions around what knowledge production looks like, what we need to incentivize it. And these assumptions are not part of many indigenous people's communities and how they approach sacred knowledge and psychedelic medicine, plant medicine more generally. So we also have this big gap that's quite acute in the IP system with psychedelics that see a big rupture, a cultural rupture around what knowledge should be protected in the first place. So existing issues, as I kind of touched on these, low quality patents and risk of patent trolls, these are issues that we've been hearing in the psychedelic space for years. Constantly a concern amongst the top researchers, be them in labs or startups. There's this high concern, oh great, we're gonna get a bunch of low quality patents. There's been some patents that have already issued that have some very kind of specious claims around whether or not those are actually valid. Once a patent issues, though, you're inside the IP economy, which is very expensive to navigate. But with this comes a concern over the risk of patent trolls. And just by show of hands, who here has heard of a patent troll or is familiar with patent trolls? Okay, most everyone. A really quick summary is patent trolls have largely plagued the big tech market to date, but they're in life sciences have been largely spared, but that's really changing. Digital therapeutics, anyone wanting to use AI or software inside biotech is, the trolls are coming. I hate to say it. I worked for too long in the big tech market clearing patent troll risk to be able to say otherwise. And with this, a lot of psychedelics companies are concerned. What happens is entities buy up patents, oftentimes from other companies who are going bankrupt or just need to divest some assets, and they sell them to groups of people like me, former patent litigators or patent litigators. You just need like 4 or 5 together, a little gaggle of problematic IP lawyers who take these things and then sue a whole market. Oh, wow, yeah, I don't know if this patent's valid, really. I don't think anyone actually infringes, but I'm gonna sue everyone. And because it costs at least $500,000 to settle, north of $1 million if you're actually going to fight out a patent dispute. Then the patent trolls come and are like, look, give me a break. Are you actually going to spend all this money fighting this, or for 100 grand or for 80 grand? I'll give you a license right now. You'll never see me again. So oftentimes when that type of an offer makes its way up to a CFO and they're kind of looking at just the cost benefit of engaging in the dispute, patent trolls make out quite well. So this is one big concern. Also, as I mentioned, biopiracy from indigenous peoples. This just, inside psychedelic culture as well, this just doesn't sit right. You know, it's terrible. I mean, this started in the 80s, really. I think it was University of Maryland who had gotten a patent on the ayahuasca vine, which has been used forever. Ultimately, the patent got canceled, but after, you know, a bunch of lawyers made a bunch of money, and it was very alienating for communities who've been using ayahuasca to all of a sudden see this thing patented and actually risk themselves being excluded from using it because of the wonders of the patent system. There's also a lack of technology and incentive to efficiently administer an IP commons. And this is true. There's been great, George Contreras wrote this great piece about why the Open COVID Pledge, which was this kind of IP commons and effort to have people say, what better crisis do we need to sort of collectively solve than COVID, when the whole global economy was shut down. And yet it it largely did fail. Pharma companies weren't participating. It was big tech largely participating for all types of its own interests. And with this, a lot of the psychedelic companies have been following this, and they've been saying Tactogen, MAPS, a few of these other big ones, if you're familiar with these players. And Paul Stamets has expressed some interest in IP commenting, saying, we want this. We want something where we can use our IP in a different way. We just feel like we don't have alternatives. And then when we do see the alternatives, we feel like we're losing control over our IP. And that's a huge other problem that gets scary, right? It's risky to participate in a new exercise if all of a sudden you're losing control of what may be your most valuable asset. Along with this, there's a concern around a misalignment of community commercial interests and investor commercial interests. I mean, investors, of course, just want profit maximization inside the psychedelic space. That typically means running over the people who've been stewarding this knowledge, people who kind of operate outside the mainstream of capitalism in a lot of ways. And so thinking about how can we build meaningful reciprocity initiatives with indigenous peoples, something that goes beyond your typical corporate social responsibility pledges, which have largely been kind of panned in this space as well as just being greenwashing, or things where people make these good pledges and then when push comes to shove, they don't do anything about it. They get brand value, but all of a sudden they're on the ropes needing to make money, and they're not going to do it. It's expensive, right? To actually bear the costs of participating in a more ethical IP community, it's expensive. There's added costs there. And then on top of this, the IP justice system is cost prohibitive. Along the lines of what I described with patent trolls, it's no different when it's an operating company on operating company dispute. Just by show of hands, how many people here have been party to a patent litigation? One, two, yeah, only a couple. And I obviously won't want to jump into it too much, but the short story is it's extremely expensive. And most people who end up in them, be them asserting or defending, just come to realize like I either want out of this problem altogether, in which case they buy IP risk management products, and these have really been booming over the past 15 years, or they just decide I want in on this racket, and how can I get my IP over to a troll or an enforcement entity so I can get a little cut. So what's SciDAO's vision? So we've been hearing all of this. What does the market need? And we want to become the kind of interconnective tissue, the mycelial network for those who are especially interested in fungus, which is popular, of course, in psychedelics with psychedelic mushrooms, where we can take intellectual property that exists among the community and begin to network it and actually have intellectual property become this vehicle for interconnecting a whole ecosystem that ideally, if we do it right, can solve for these existing issues I was just describing. Mycelial networks are even sort of beyond an analogy here. They're important because they operate under principles of mutual aid, of kind of local expertise. A mushroom, a fruiting body, a mushroom inside the forest has its little local ecology. And then that thing through a mycelial network is connected like a mile away to a tree and another mushroom. And these things exchange intelligence, exchange resources, all to help build a symbiotic, more healthy ecosystem. And that seems to be hitting the nail on the head for what we've been hearing from the psychedelic companies and kind of what they really want. And so with this, using our IP tokenization protocols, we want IP NFTs. Of course, we know what these are. This is kind of the core hard IP that this type of a network would be built around. IPTs to co-govern and manage the development of little nodes of IP spores as they germinate, if you will, hypha, networked into hi-fi. And then the mycelial network, which really becomes a network of all of this. And across token governance as well, we want Psi to be governing the broad meta network resources, the mycelium, so to speak. IPTs, of course, governing those who have a direct and clearer interest and kind of buy-in to the development of specific IP, and then IP NFTs as means for people to participate. And what do these solutions ultimately provide? Well, I'll show you in a minute how we're scheming out ways to do permissionless participation in this network, obviously something really important to Web3 culture, a platform for open science, superior IP validation. As I mentioned, low quality patents are a real problem, and just as some basic stats for all patents, 50% of them that get litigated through on the merits are then found invalid. So anytime you want to assert a patent, you're also kind of rolling the dice. Uh-oh, if I assert this against someone with a lot of money, they might invalidate the whole thing. Freedom to operate, these ideas of saying, look, we want to preserve a commercial market, but we don't want to be jammed up just doing our R&D. This is really, again, what decentralized science is about. Cost-effective IP mediation and conflict transformation. This allows us to create an alternative platform to resolve disputes if we're going to say, well, the IP justice system as it exists is a problem. And then, of course, just community co-governance. And something really cool happened as we've been getting our initial Lighthouse project off the ground. We had an LOI, we have an LOI with Robin Carhart-Harris, who is one of the biggest names, one of the most prominent psychedelics researchers out there. He's largely responsible for kicking off the psychedelic renaissance when he was at Imperial College of London and doing one of the first surveys that actually administered psilocybin in a clinical setting since the prohibitionist era. And since then, I mean, you know, you're trying psychedelic science, for instance, he's talking, it's overflow room with, you know, I mean, close to 1,000 people wanting to hear him speak. We've been excited to have his interest, and something cool here happened where at first we were thinking, all right, we're going to do our kind of typical model. We're going to fund an MDMA related research where he's going to do fMRI imaging. He was excited. Great. You know, give me a few $100,000 to get this underway. It is a cool project. And then we got to talking with him a bit more about these solutions that we actually want to bake into SciDAO by really creating this tokenized IP network, by supporting new platforms for tokenized open science. And Robin stopped and said, you know what? We can do this MDMA project down the road, but this is huge. This is solving for all of these issues that I was describing have been out there, at least now validated now by Robin rather than Chris Byrnes, the IP lawyer. And he said, look, I want to help support this. I want to help support this, and I want to do it with a couple of people I've been working with closely, you know, one of whom is a really big name, Unlimited Sciences. They designed the large data survey that Johns Hopkins used for an initial study, best in class kind of scientific survey design. Balaj Shigeti, who's been a very active part of early SciDAO work and who also has been recognized as one of the leading, he recently finished his PhD, was at Imperial, he's on his way to UCSF, and he wrote this amazing paper, very well received, on a self-blinded microdose study that really caught some attention and that has helped position him as one of the leading thought leaders, a young researcher, leading thought leader on open science. And then Hannes Kettner, who's also part of Robin's lab and has worked closely with Matt at Unlimited Sciences and Balaj. So we have this team of folks with just amazing pedigree, wanting to build something new and really wanting SciDAO to be the platform for this. And so we're in the process of creating a new LOI where we'll be launching this. So how does this work? You know, what would tokenized open science actually look like? And I see I'm about out of time. 1 minute, can I just wrap up? Okay, so I'll get through this. So what we're doing here and where we're innovating a lot with SciDAO is taking IP NFTs and putting different things in them than what a sponsored research agreement might be. And these protocols that we've built, Jesse and I and some of the legal folks at Molecule, are really legal primitives that they're very flexible, and I really hope people who are interested in this come chat with me. But what you can do with a survey is put a psychedelic science survey, minted it into an IP NFT, have that include your terms and conditions of the study, tokenize that so survey participants are legally accepting the terms and condition of a study, incentivize them with Sci. Those who've done large-scale surveys in citizen science probably know 80% of your initial participants drop off. Using tokenization to incentivize completion through the end unlocks things. And then all of a sudden we allow the DAO to be co-governing the IP that's created out of citizen science and different research projects. Let me wrap up. I've went too slow. Apologies, but we're doing really awesome stuff, and please come chat with me some more if you want to learn about new ways to use tokenized IP.